So would it be fair to say then that for young people and people generally, there's a stigma around receiving social welfare?
Oh, I would.
I hate to admit it, but yeah, I mean, kind of,
You get labelled
Yeah.
on benefits. It's one of those things that you see. I don't sound bad yet, but like when you go to the job centre, mostly the people that you see with are drug addicts or whatever, and then you kind of think, are they kind of like putting us into a kind of boat and kind of get the
I hear what you say. I'm not entirely sure that is the case.
I would say it's just like,
That may be your perception of the case, but I mean, I'm sure the truth is, and I mean, thankfully, I've not had to go to one for a few years. But I mean, yes, when you go, you do see kind of all of humanity there. But the fact is, now, let's face it, there's people of all classes, of all statuses, who are finding themselves out of work and who are having to go into these places. And as I say, and as you probably agree from mentioning your blog, you just don't get treated very well in these places, and that may be because of the stresses and strains on the people who work there, and I don't want to demonise them particularly, but they're not always as helpful as they could be, and I think for them it's often get you out of the door as fast as they can, and not to say, well, actually, here are you know, let me talk to you as an adult, and here are your options, and let's look at what we can do and see if we can work something out. It's just, right, I'll sign you up to this scheme and make sure you go to that once a week for 5 weeks.
But I think what I found probably agrees with what you said more slightly. In that I pretended that I'd just graduated, and I kind of got the impression that I wasn't yet low enough down the scale to be talked to, and to be worthy of what they offered. So I can't.
As if you should go and help yourself for a while before.
Yeah, and all I'd asked them for was, you know, to kind of have some guidance on what was out there as a graduate. And the impression I got was, well, yeah.
It's like the kind of jobs they offer you as well. It's like, I've been there, to be honest with you, like I've been unemployed quite a bit of time, but I find ways to keep myself away, go business ideas every day, and it's just like, personally, I've been to the job centre here, and I sat down for about 2 weeks, and literally I don't like it because I find I've got a work, and the kind of job that they try to put away, you want to do quite remedial jobs, warehouse jobs, and you want to look at other jobs as well, but towards those kind of jobs, they kind of they don't really talk about those, they talk about, you want to work in a warehouse, or you want to work in security guard, or you want to do something. So those kind of opportunities kind of putting you in a way that they don't really, not really valuing you as much. They're thinking that, all right, we're just getting something.
Yes, they're not. I mean, I found the same thing with that, is that they're not the place to go for professional jobs, for want of a better phrase. Having said that, I think, I know it's really difficult, but I think with some people, even if they come from a professional background, it might just be about taking a job, getting yourself more settled, and then looking from that to get into what you want to get into. I'm not entirely sure how picky people can afford to be. That's just the truth of it.
I found them to be quite honest about that. They kind of sat me down the first day and said, you're not going to get a job that you kind of went to university for here, but you know, when you kind of get a job, it's a lot easier to kind of get another one.
Because the pressure isn't dramatically there, you can then spend some time.
So should job centres offer, should they be available for young people of any situation, or are they specifically reserved for the young people who are struggling more?
Well, I'm sure they'd say that they are. I'm sure they'd say that they are available to everybody. But I mean, you know, you pointed out your own experience, and clearly you felt that they weren't there for you. So,
what do you mean, like being available to people who like who have jobs or another way?
Not necessarily. Just young people who have just graduated or Should basically they provide a service where you could just go and discuss career advice? You might not necessarily be looking for something specific. Should
But
there
there's
be
other
more
places you can do that, isn't there? I mean,
beyond a school or a college?
But there are other places you can. I'm not saying they shouldn't do that, but I think there are other places you can do that. I mean, I'm the trustee of a charity in Hinkley called Next Generation, and a little bit like Connections, and that is a great deal of what they do, and they've had a lot of their. I think the trouble with if you make that part of the government service of the job centre is that great kind of NGOs like Next Generation, which are already seeing their funding cut, there'll be no point for them at all.
Okay. So are young people then aware of these non-governmental services that are out
That's
there?
another question. Probably not.
To be honest, it's like, personally, the way I think about it is just, like, I've been in quite a fortunate position with my parents and everything like that. They have supported me. So it's been like, more of a push in. They want you to be more independent. That's why they're pushing you towards the goals, like, look at jobs, look at all the jobs and stuff like that. But as far as when it comes to like sitting there going on the internet looking for like funding and things like that, personally I haven't really done that much. So,
Yeah. So you mentioned that independence. So what would everybody's view be on cutting housing benefit for under 25s?
Ridiculous idea.
I think that's fairly shameful, and I think even Nick Clegg has said that was David Cameron speaking as leader of the Tory party. That was not David Cameron speaking as what is going to happen under this coalition government. And I mean that would be the kind of I mean, without being too melodramatic about it, that would be the kind of thing that I'd certainly have to if that was done with Lib Dem acquiescence, then I'd have to seriously consider whether I remain a Liberal Democrat. Mm-hmm. I think it's an abhorrent idea.
So we all agree then that encouragement towards young people's independence is something that should be promoted throughout society.
There are benefits that aren't immediately obvious, but will kind of come. Like, I mean, people who are lucky enough to go to university get that experience of being like living on their own and managing their own budget. But if you don't, and you kind of in your kind of parents' house until you're 25, you're not prepared. Even if it is with support of the state, it's still something that's worth keeping.
So while we're talking about non-governmental, moving on from housing benefit, credit unions, are young people aware of the credit unions? No?
I had to ask you what credit union was.
Yeah.
I had a vague idea, but I didn't really.
They're essentially an alternative to a bank. They're more ethical, and their loan services are done as a community. So the people who are members of the credit union are essentially running the bank. Yeah, they're a cooperative, yeah. So alternatives then obviously aren't made aware to other people. Obviously, I think the video that we did with the interview with the credit union a couple of weeks ago, their point was they don't obviously have a large marketing budget like banks do.
Yeah.
However, is it then state responsibility or the credit union's responsibility to engage young people in alternatives?
It's a state's responsibility. I mean, the alternative is to kind of end up in those one-word advert things. I mean, the state has a responsibility to protect vulnerable citizens, so we need to make them aware of what's available.
I think like as a whole, young people are quite like, I don't know, it's like we're disadvantaged in a way. Like we're not seen as, we're not taken as serious as someone who's probably a bit older or something like that, and I think that has quite a big effect on what we can achieve. So it is a bit like the way we're approaching and stuff. We're just seeing like, oh, like you see, if you go to like me, I've been trying to start my own business now, and I want to start renting. I am still going to start a rental company, but I want to get insurance quote. I've been to so many insurance brokers. How many thousand insurance companies, everything. Only one company even came near like considering having me put my cars on traders and stuff like that. And the biggest thing is just my age and stuff like that. So it's like kind of you're going towards, you want to start stuff, and obviously I think as a young person, if you start younger, obviously by the time you hit adult age, you'll have even more experience. But I don't think people, like, they don't see it in that way.
Yes, it's ironic, isn't it? With programs like Young Apprentice and all of these things, is that you think being encouraging more of an entrepreneurial atmosphere in this country, but I don't think we do really.
I think the thing is with things like the Young Apprentice, you don't see and the lower end young people who do have brilliant ideas and do have the potential and the scope. It's always the young people who have had that extra step up in life.
Yeah, that's it. That's really like, you see a lot of people from more disadvantaged backgrounds. It's not like they're stupid, but they're in a state where they're trying to think, oh, what can we make of ourselves? But then once they've took a step a few times, try doing something, and you just get, like, you're starting a business or whatever, there's so much paperwork, there's so much in terms of you've got to do all these tax stuff, and you've got to think about your finance, you've got to think, obviously that's just part of the business, but that's just planning in your head. When it comes down to putting it into fruition, it's even harder, because that sort of stuff demotivates young people a lot.